Deep sleep. How does it change during aging? What's its connection to Alzheimer's disease? And what's my data? So first, we're looking at a hypnograph, which is a measure of sleep stage on the y-axis versus hours of sleep on the x-axis. So starting from being awake, when we fall asleep, we progress through various stages of sleep. Light sleep being N1 and N2, defined as N1 and N2, and N3 being defined as deep sleep, otherwise known as slow wave sleep. So the subject in this picture spends about an hour in deep sleep. And then they progress up to N2, relatively light sleep, where but then they go to REM sleep and spend a few minutes there. So that right there is one sleep cycle. And then the subject in this picture goes through another sleep cycle. So first through N2 and then to N3, where they spend a little bit more time in slow wave sleep or deep sleep. And this process continues throughout the night until we wake up at some point later in the future. So just as a quick aside, notice that most of the deep sleep accumulates within the first 4 hours or so, and then it goes away. Conversely, REM sleep starts off relatively low and then accumulates throughout the night, such that when we wake up, it's mostly REM sleep, dream sleep, not so much slow wave sleep. So how does slow wave sleep change during aging? So before answering that, first it's important to go through how total sleep time changes during aging. So this is data from a meta-analysis of 65 studies, and I'll post a link to all of these studies in the description for the video. So for a young subject, in this case 20 years old, young people sleep about 450 minutes per night. So in contrast, an 80-year-old only gets about 350 minutes of sleep per night. So what about slow wave sleep? So in this case, the percentage of sleep or slow wave sleep divided by total sleep time, otherwise known as slow wave sleep percentage, also declines during aging. So for a 20-year-old, 20-year-old gets about 20% of the total sleep time as slow wave sleep, which, when considering the data in the previous slide, 450 minutes of total sleep time, that's about 90 minutes of deep sleep per night for the 20-year-old. However, for the older subject, for the older adult, an 80-year-old in this case, they only get about 9% of their total sleep time as slow wave sleep, which, considering that an 80-year-old gets about 350 minutes of sleep per night, that translates to about 32 minutes of slow wave sleep, so about threefold less slow wave sleep for an older adult when compared to a younger subject. So how does getting less sleep during aging affect health? Well, one way is linked with Alzheimer's disease, or amyloid-beta production, which is found in Alzheimer's disease patients. So first, in looking at this plot here, what it basically shows is that a higher baseline proportion of slow wave activity during sleep is correlated with a reduced 4-year accumulation of brain amyloid-beta, A-beta, in 76-year-old subjects. So just looking at that plot, so we've got rate of A-beta accumulation on the y-axis and then brain slow wave activity on the x-axis. And what we can see by extrapolating with the trend line, we can see that for subjects that had higher brain slow wave activity during sleep, they had lower levels of A-beta accumulation in their brains over a 4-year period. So this was a longitudinal study. So that's a good thing. Get more slow wave sleep, have less A-beta in the brain, at least in this study. Conversely, subjects that got a lower proportion of slow wave sleep had a higher rate of A-beta accumulation in their brain over that 4-year period, as indicated by the arrow. So why is A-beta important? So in looking at this simplified cartoon, A-beta affects the synapses, the points at which neurons communicate with each other. So first, in looking at the normal synapse, and the condition when there is no A-beta, there is normal neuronal activity, normal neuronal interneuronal communication. However, in the situation where there is a lot of A-beta in between or at the synapse, in between neurons, it induces neuronal hyperactivation, which leads to neurodegeneration. So getting enough deep sleep to minimize A-beta is important. So one way I plan on trying to reduce A-beta in my brain is by tracking my slow wave sleep. So I do that by wearing a fitness tracker. And I should point out that I'm not sponsored to promote them, so I'm just going to briefly mention who they are. So I wear Whoop, and Whoop has been compared against the gold standard for measuring sleep in overnight sleep studies, which is polysomnography, PSG. So Whoop was compared against PSG for detecting each of the sleep stages. So TST, total sleep time, wakefulness, light sleep, slow wave sleep, SWS, and REM sleep. So how did Whoop do when compared with the gold standard for measuring these sleep cycles or sleep stages? So first, in terms of total sleep time, Whoop was just as good as the gold standard. And similarly, for slow wave sleep, it was as good as PSG for detecting the amount of slow wave sleep. So the values between the two different methods, Whoop and PSG, was not statistically different. So based on this was a small study. I think it was in like 12 subjects. One could argue that Whoop is as good as the gold standard for PSG for detecting total sleep time and slow wave sleep. Now, well, I should also mention too, for wakefulness and light sleep, it was also not different from PSG. However, notice that for the REM sleep, Whoop actually overestimated REM sleep by about 15 minutes. So, however, a discussion of REM sleep isn't in this video. So, but for what we want, total sleep time and slow wave sleep, Whoop is based on this data just as good as the gold standard. So, how much nightly slow wave sleep do I get? So this is data for the last 526 days. So from May 2019 through October of 2020. So the amount of slow wave sleep in hours is plotted on the y-axis against time, and each dot corresponds to a day. 1 day over the last year and a half. So based on the trend line, I get about 93 minutes of slow wave sleep per day. So that would indicate that my slow wave sleep amount is relatively youthful, which is a good thing. So that may change with time, and if it does, I'll try different things to try to get it going back towards youth. So what variables affect slow wave sleep with the goal of optimizing it? And if you can optimize it, potentially we could reduce our accumulation of A-beta with time. So two things that I think may have an impact are I keep a consistent sleep schedule. So I try to get to sleep between 9 to 10 p.m. Every night without fail. And even there are some nights where I'm trying to go to bed, from 8 to 9 o'clock. Earlier the better. If it's dark outside, time to get to sleep. That's how we evolved for millions of years. And I also try to stop eating or drinking at least 3 hours before bedtime. And on many days now, it's way earlier than that. So maybe 6 to 7 hours before bedtime. So a long overnight fast. But are there other factors that affect slow wave sleep? So the obvious would be just sleep more. If you sleep more, you'll get more deep sleep. But is that true? What does the data say? So at least for me, for my data, when looking at the correlation for slow wave sleep versus total sleep time, so slow wave sleep on the y-axis, total sleep time on the x-axis, there is a moderate significant correlation between those two. So more sleep time, more total sleep time, more slow wave sleep. That's a statistically significant correlation in my data. And to get the 90 minutes of slow wave sleep that's found in youth, I would need to sleep about 7 hours a night, which isn't too tough for me to do so far, at least at my current age. All right, but which factors impact total sleep time? It's easy to say just sleep more, but how do you control your brain's sleeping more while you're asleep? It's one thing for me to say, okay, I'm going to eat X, Y, or Z in my diet, and that may impact, muscle mass, for example, protein, impacting protein synthesis. But how can you use, diet or supplements or anything to impact you while you're asleep? That's a whole nother ballgame, at least my opinion. So to investigate that, I started looking at correlations between my diet with total sleep time, with the hypothesis that maybe there are things in my diet that can affect how much sleep I get, and if I get more sleep, potentially I'm getting more slow wave sleep. So the strongest correlation between total sleep time with all of my dietary variables was total calorie intake, the average daily calorie intake. And again, this is during the same 526-day period from last year to this October. And we can see a moderate correlation, 0.35, for total sleep time with daily calorie intake. And what it shows is the higher my calorie intake, the longer I'll sleep. So with that hypothesis, if I just simply increase my daily calorie intake, I should get more total sleep time and more slow wave sleep. So in support of the hypothesis, so that's just total sleep time versus daily calorie intake. The goal is to get, to maximize slow wave sleep. What's the correlation between daily calorie intake with slow wave sleep? So there's a weak correlation, but statistically significant. So the correlation is 0.13, and it's significant at a p-value of 0.003. So what about the effect of an increased calorie intake on other metrics? If I increase my calorie intake to increase total sleep time, to increase slow wave sleep, and we know that having more slow wave sleep may be good for reducing amyloid-beta accumulation in the brain. If I optimize that, but it negatively getting too many calories negatively affects other variables, well, that's not good. So what about other metrics? So first, increasing calorie intake may negatively affect resting heart rate, RHR, and heart rate variability. These are two cardiovascular related metrics. Actually, heart rate variability is a measure of sympathetic nervous system divided by parasympathetic nervous system, so it's not just the cardiovascular system. So first, in looking at heart rate versus calorie intake, resting heart rate on the y-axis versus total calorie intake on the x-axis, we can see that for a higher calorie intake, there's also a higher resting heart rate. And based on right now, my average calorie intake is somewhere around 25 to 2,600 calories a day. That would put me at a resting heart rate of about 48 beats per minute. And if you've seen my previous video on what's optimal for resting heart rate, values closer to 45 are associated with maximally reduced all-cause mortality risk. So eating about 2,600 calories, at least based on this correlation with resting heart rate, puts me at 48, which isn't too far from the 45 that may be optimal for health. So if I increase my calorie intake, resting heart rate would increase, which is going in the wrong direction. So similar data is observed for heart rate variability. So based on my diet right now, about 25 to 2,600 calories a day, my heart rate variability is about 60 milliseconds. And as I noted in my last in my video for heart rate variability, again, link in the right corner, values close to 70 are found in youth. So if I increase my calorie intake based on the negative correlation here, I'd expect my heart rate variability to be reduced, which also is going in the wrong direction. So just to illustrate, the link between calorie intake, total sleep time, slow wave sleep, and these cardiovascular metrics, it's important to identify the calorie intake that maximizes all of them, not just selectively one but not others. So finding the sweet spot is key. And that's all I've got for now. You can find me lots of places online. Have a great day.